Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name's Bill Gladden. I'm the Executive Director of French and Pickering Creeks Conservation Trust, and we're so thrilled to have you here. We were established in 1967. We're a nonprofit conservation organization, and we rely on support from the community to continue our work. We've permanently preserved over 13,700 acres throughout northern Chester County in partnership with municipalities, landowners, public and private partners galore. I've been with French and Pickering over 8 years and was surprised to learn that our Thomas P. Bentley Preserve is quite a birding hotspot. Our guest speaker tonight and her work helps not only to sustain the birds that pass through the preserve, but also helps to sustain a variety of species throughout the region. Our speaker, Zoë Warner, helps advance those goals by working locally to conserve sensitive grassland bird species through the Grassland Collaboration. And I'm just going to call it GBC. The GBC was established to promote the benefits of agriculture working lands for grassland bird survival. The goal of GBC is to work with farmers and landowners to create a working conservation landscape among Chester County's farm fields and nature preserves to support grassland birds while minimizing disruption to agricultural production. To achieve this, the GBC provides guidance and education on science-based beneficial land management practices. Zoe's research focuses on land use impacts on avian productivity. She works with farmers and landowners to implement beneficial management practices for grassland bird populations that rely on Chester County's farm fields for survival. So we're so grateful that she was able to take time from her busy schedule to come and share that with us and hopefully the audience at home, and that you will be inspired to share the message with others throughout the community. So let's give Zoe a welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming out on this beautiful evening to sit and listen to birds and hopefully go out and encounter them after this. So as I said, I'm Zoë Warner. I'm the program manager for the Grassland Bird Collaboration, which is a program of Willistown Conservation Trust. And so tonight we're going to talk about working together to reverse the decline of grassland birds in Chester County. So I know that these lectures have, especially this year, have focused on the 250th anniversary of our country. So I can't say that the grassland birds fought in the Revolutionary battles, but I will say that they were here then. And actually, we have grassland birds that we have been able to detect at Birmingham Hill, which is one of the Brandywine battlefield sites. So it's sort of a connection to that 250. But in terms of grassland birds, a lot of people associate them with the Midwestern prairies, and that's true. That's a large area for grassland birds. But through a combination of pre and post-European forest clearing, these prairies and savannas were created that supported these grassland birds, and evidence actually shows that they were common and abundant in the East. So some of the ways that these clearings were created in this forested East were Native Americans used fire to clear land for crops and also to keep areas open for hunting. And so this is actually a picture of Yellowstone after a forest fire, but this would be sort of that mosaic that would be created using fire. And then when European settlers came, they cleared more of the forest for cropland and for grazing. And in fact, grassland bird populations increased in response to this clearing. So these are a few idyllic pictures of what it might have looked like way back when. And then, of course, we have our natural architects, the beavers. And when they abandon dams, they create these beaver meadows that are these grassy meadowy shrubby areas. So there were these openings that would have been intertwined with our natural forests of the East. So in Pennsylvania, these grass-associated species were widespread by the late 19th century. with their numbers increasing with clearing, and actually populations were stable through the 1950s. But by the 60s, their population trends were changing. So throughout their entire range, grassland birds showed steeper, more consistent, and more geographically widespread declines than any other behavioral or ecological guild. And this was from a study done in 1994. So I'm sure many of you in this room, if you're bird lovers, are aware of the 2019 bird report telling us that 3 billion birds had disappeared. So these trends had already been documented, but with the 3 billion birds report, we learned that 1 in 4 birds were gone in the last 50 years. And of course, no surprise to those of us who are sort of aware of grassland birds before, 53% of grassland birds have disappeared. So it's they're experiencing the greatest decline of any land bird group. And so that's 720 million birds. And so in this area, we have 3 sort of focal grassland species that are most common. And among them, bobolink is sort of one of the most iconic for sure. And it's actually a tipping point species, which means that it's lost more than 50% of its population in the last 50 years and is on track to lose another 50% in the next 50 years if trends don't change. So we've lost 3 in 5 bobolinks, 3 in 4 meadowlarks, and 2 in 3 grasshopper sparrows. So these are some pretty stark numbers when we think about these birds. And there are a number of factors that have contributed to these losses. So available habitat is one of the main factors. There is just less available habitat. So we've lost native grasslands. And as I mentioned, the Midwest is the stronghold for these native grasslands. So this map is showing us the historical areas where native grasslands were, and we've lost 62% of them to leave what's there in the blue. Also, farmlands have been converted for development. So I found this picture on the internet actually, and it's just sort of perfect how it's just laid out so nicely as a subdivision, and you can see just what's being lost. And then too, the impacts it has on that farming community right next door. Habitat fragmentation is another issue that affects grassland birds. So even if there are grasslands, if they're all cut up into these small little parcels with these hedgerows here, they become unusable to these birds that want these wide open spaces that are reminiscent of those prairies. And then in the east, we have farmlands that have been abandoned. They're no longer being maintained for early succession, so they eventually will succeed to forest. And in the West, they actually have a major problem of encroachment of red cedar trees, which are native to the U.S., but they're not native to the prairies, and the birds are actually spreading the seeds and kind of taking themselves out of their own habitat. So habitat is an issue. And then if you want to compound it, there's agricultural intensification that's happened really since the 1960s. That's that period where we've started to see that precipitous drop off. So changes in land management. So we've had conversion of grasslands to into crop production. So this picture is actually sort of the reverse of that. Now they're encouraging farmers to put prairie strips in between their crops, but you can see the stark difference between a monoculture crop and then the rich diversity that can be part of those prairie strips in there. So when that prairie is cleared for cropland, there's a huge loss in biodiversity. The use of synthetic pesticides, and it impacts the health of the birds if they contact the pesticides, and also it diminishes the availability of insects. And these birds are reliant on feeding their young almost entirely through insects through that development, those early stages of development. So though they're seed eaters later in their life, they're carnivores early on. And so when we're removing those insects from the landscape, we're impacting the health of the next generation. Hayfields have also been converted to alfalfa, which it produces higher yields. But the problem, and alfalfa in itself is not bad. I've encountered grasshopper sparrows in alfalfa. They don't seem to mind it. The issue is that it's cut more frequently, so you're not allowing enough time for the full nesting cycle to be completed before the field is mowed. And the thing that we encounter a lot is that hayfields are mowed earlier and more frequently, which coincides with the peak breeding activity. So these pictures harken back to the way that fields were hayed back in, historically, as we were seeing this increase in numbers throughout in more agricultural activity. So I remember reading Little House on the Prairie and Laura Ingalls talking about piling the hay high on the wagon, and it would take them days. They would go out day after day after day to hay these fields. That kind of low impact farming allows plenty of time for birds to get out of the way and to develop. And even when we had more mechanization, this kind of low impact farming here, the picture of this mechanical mower, but it's not as intense as what we have today, which are these mowers that can clear hundreds of acres in a day. And so they're fast moving. And if birds are not mature enough to perceive the danger and get out of the way, they can just get sucked in, and it becomes a field of carnage, unfortunately. So these are all of the the really tough things that these birds are facing. And it can feel pretty daunting. And then to add on top of it, 85% of our grassland birds are dependent on privately owned fields. So as much as we do preservation and support, having publicly available preserved areas, we're never going to preserve our way out of this problem. We need to partner with private landowners to look at management and how it can be modified to allow for breeding. So, of the 29 obligate grassland species, 82% of them the 82% of their population was distributed across private lands. So, as I said, it can feel pretty daunting. But I think the thing that gives me hope, and hopefully can give others hope, is that we are seeing changes being made, and we're seeing the impact of changing management practices and how it can benefit grassland birds. And really, as we were starting to launched this program, this State of the Birds came out in 2022, and their message was basically the same as ours, which is that these losses can be reversed if we can partner with landowners and farmers and conservation organizations and work together to look at the possibilities. And so locally, we're actually really well positioned to support grassland bird conservation. And that's what the Grassland Bird Collaboration is really set up to do. It's the landowners, farmers, and conservation organizations working together to establish a conservation working landscape. And so the way I think of it is these are working landscapes, and we're inserting conservation into those working landscapes. And that really helps us to see what the connections of the farmlands to the birds, and also highlight the benefits of these agricultural working lands for grassland birds. So, as we lose farmland, we lose the opportunity to also support species that use those farmlands. So I think a lot of times We can think of farmers as, oh, they're using pesticides, they're doing this, they're doing that, but they're actually stewards of the land. And so the more that I've worked with them, the more I understand how important it is what they're doing. And also, they love the land the way we do, and probably more. So it's that idea of where do we find this common ground to work together. So for the work that we've been doing over the last number of years, our focal conservation is part of the rural resource area that was delineated by Chester County. And these are areas that are meant to support an agricultural economy, to keep densities at rural levels, to really not promote a lot of development. So that's one thing that we have going for us in Chester County, is that we have areas that are slated for development and then areas that are slated to not be developed. And then within those, we do really have a robust agricultural economy still. So we work in this area. It's in green there on the map. And it's about 25,000 acres of contiguous protected agricultural land. And it's actually part of what was originally the King Ranch, and Brandywine began preserving that area about 40 years ago. And the interesting thing is that was sort of what started Brandywine Conservancy and started the preservation of Chester County. And it's actually the very heart of the work that we are doing and where we started. So it all has kind of come full circle. So I think of it a lot of times as, the preservation is sort of the skeleton. It's that green skeleton that goes throughout the landscape. And then the more we can add in the benefits on top of that skeleton, we can really start to build up what we can do for birds, for water, for wildlife, all of those sorts of things. So before this all got started, it's not like we just came out and said, hey, I think we have some birds here. Let's figure this out. There was a lot of work that went into it. And then really, I think that's been a key piece of this, is all of this has been grounded in research. So I started my dissertation research in 2014 in that area. And I was doing bird surveys and using landscape measurements to create a predictive model to understand, can we start to look at where do we have the highest probability of these birds. So I developed this map as part of my research, and the darker areas are the areas that have the highest probability of having grassland birds. So I wasn't able to survey all of the properties, but a few years after I graduated, we had a student, Liam Hart, who he wanted to do grassland bird research. And when he went out and surveyed fields that were in areas that hadn't been surveyed before, we did find the grassland birds. So it was kind of nice to know that my model actually wasn't just in theory, but it worked in practice. So we know that these birds are out there. That was the first thing. But it's, as I wrapped up my dissertation, many years of doing it, I knew that wasn't the end, because it's not enough to just say, well, we know where the birds are. But if you're not managing for the birds, then you're really not doing anything for conservation. So we knew we wanted to manage for the birds, but there was another opportunity to look at movement among the bobolinks. So we nanotagged bobolinks. And so you can see in the middle there that little tag, it fits around their hip bones, sort of like a backpack for their fanny pack or something for their legs. And then it has that trailing antenna there. You can see it on that long picture. And anytime the bird is near a local sensor nome, or if it passes within 1 kilometer of a taller MODIS tower, its location is detected and recorded. So with that, we were able to look at local movement and also migratory pathways. And also, it's just really intriguing, and it was a way that people became interested in these birds. And as we were doing that, we were also doing nest searching. And so we weren't doing exhaustive nest searching. We were more doing opportunistic, trying to find these nests. And the whole idea was if we could find them, which was a feat in itself, because these are just little tiny cups of grass down on the, right, laid down right on the ground. And then, all of this thatch and grass over top of it. So it takes a while just to find one, believe me. And then if you put a stake in it and walk away and think you're coming back to find that same nest, it's sometimes it disappears in the sea of grass. So, but luckily we were able to find some. And the idea was if we could age the babies at the time of detection of the nests, then we could project out when it would be safe to mow in those fields. And so basically we knew that, knowing the development cycle, they need about 10 to 12 days in the nest, but then after that, they need another 10 to 12 days, 14 days to walk around outside of the nest. So they'll pop out of the nest and walk around and be fed by their parents, but they won't start really taking, and they'll sort of pop up out of the grass at the later part of that period. But it's not until they've had that whole period of walking development that then they become strong enough to fly. And when they can fly well enough, then they can get out of the way of the mower. So that's sort of what has to be built into the cycle, is that whole development period. And what we found was similar to what was found in Virginia. They did do exhaustive nest searching. It was a full dissertation research just on that, on nestling development. But they found that if you wait to mow till July 1st, 90% of the successful nests will fledge the birds. So you can see that red box there. That would be the percentage of birds that would not have fledged before July 1st. And so if you want to be purist about it, those birds would die. But one of the things that they often say in Virginia is, yeah, you might lose 10% after July 1st, but you're guaranteed to lose 100 if you mow in June. So it's this idea of compromise, because once again, we're working with farmers who are making a living off of the land. And so it's, how do we find that common ground, and how do we work with each other to meet the needs of the birds and for them to meet the needs of their farming. And so one of the other really interesting things that has kind of began to come up before we started doing our full surveys, but since then we've seen it over and over, year after year, is that these birds actually sort of partition off the landscape. So even though they're grassland birds, they have different preferences, and bobolinks don't usually occur with grasshopper sparrows, but meadowlarks are more generalists, so they're kind of like right down the middle. They can kind of do anything. But the hay fields that we call our mulch hay fields, which means that they're the fields that are mowed after July 1st, those fields are generally in the area where we're working. The hay is taken off and sold to the mushroom industry. And so that's a market. We've got the mushroom capital of the world in Kennett. And so that's a market that's available for that hay, which is also a benefit to these birds. And then we also have feed hay fields where the farmers really want to get that hay off before, usually like May 25th, something around there. And if they can get it off early enough, the fields can then grow back enough to bring in grasshopper sparrows, which are later nesting birds. And meadowlarks, as I said, they're generalists. They're kind of on the edges. They always seem to find a way to get into a field. One of the interesting things that we found was all three birds were in pastures that were managed for cattle. And so the idea that we've sort of floated is that because the cattle are moving in the field, they're kind of changing the vegetation structure. So some parts will have tall grass, some parts will have lower grass, or maybe some little patchy areas. And so you have enough diversity within the structure to enable all of the birds to be in there. And then, as I showed you before, that with those prairie strips that were in those crop fields, we have seen something similar where sort of grass filter strips that are used for water filtration. We can get grasshopper sparrows and meadowlarks in fields that have that mix of grass and hay. And so especially with the grasshopper sparrows, they don't necessarily need a full field of kind of thick vegetation like the bobolinks, but they do want to have those wide open areas that are protective. So if there's these strips within a larger crop field, they can go into those strips and use them. So, there are a number of different iterations of our research that we conducted, that I've been doing since 2014. And then with the Willistown Bird team, we've been doing different things. But there's sort of three main things that have kind of become our constants and that guide what we're doing in terms of the conservation work. So the first thing is that these birds are area sensitive. So if you have a field that's a 5-acre beautiful grassland, these birds just won't be there. Even if they have different preferences for habitat structure, they all want large interior area because that's a safe area. So when you have hedgerows and edgy intrusions and things, that's where predators lurk. So they want to be as far away from that as they can. So large areas are one thing that they're looking for. No-mow benefit all of these birds, even if you're mowing at different fields at different times. What's really needed is just to have that window of no-mow that allows the birds to develop. And then to be able to move off of the fields when they are harvested. And habitat connectivity is another important factor. So working in that area with the 25,000 acres that are protected, these birds are able to kind of make use of this patchwork of different field types to meet their needs throughout their summer life cycle while they're here. So, for instance, we have a field where the birds never breed, but it's left standing later into the season. So when other fields are mowed, they'll move up to that field, and they're all just kind of congregating and staging there in preparation for their migration south. So all of these different fields can sort of play a part. So we kind of have the seal of approval here in Chester County where we can meet these requirements. And actually there are other areas in southeastern PA where we can meet these requirements. So I always think it's kind of funny. Like I know when I first started doing my dissertation research, a few people said, "What do you mean you're doing grassland birds in Pennsylvania?" But they're here, and if they're here, then it's worth conserving them. So with all of that, all of the data we have been gathering, the research, we kind of took our show on the road in late 2022 and met with farmers and landowners and kind of let them know what was happening, even though we had been meeting with some ahead of time. But when they saw the data and they really, it's, understanding, oh, my little spot of earth can be important. It can do something, it's kind of empowering. And so I think having that ability to know, oh, there's a possibility to make a difference here. That was kind of a motivating factor for people to really consider implementing bird-friendly management. And so these are just, two of the birds you might encounter. And I have to say that female bobolink, which is I don't know which side it's on there, but she always is so beguiling. Anyway, that's one of my favorite pictures. So, we developed this model a few years ago that we've kind of been following, but tweaking and changing and adding in. And as I, this is kind of a moving thing where there's always an opportunity to do something different. But the first thing that has always been at the heart of the model is to work with the farmers to prioritize fields for inclusion into the network. So, if there's a field that we want to include, but it's not something the farmer can harvest at the time we need it, then, that's part of what we have to do. And we work with a great group of farmers. And together we've been able to delay hay mowing on over 2,000 acres in the area. And so we've really seen the results of that delayed hay. But the interesting thing that has come up is that it doesn't always have to be about delayed mowing. So we have these 500 other acres that we call them. And so there's some early mow fields. We have our row hay fields, and then we have observational fields. And so those are fields where we think, hey, there's a possibility the birds are using these fields. We don't want to ask you to change your management at all, but could we do a survey? Could we see? And then from there, it's an opportunity to open a conversation. If the birds aren't there, then, business as usual. But if the birds are there, then what are the opportunities for maybe changing the management for those acres? The next thing that's been part of our model from the beginning is really important, is to just constantly be in the fields, knowing and seeing what's happening, how the birds are using the landscape. So one of the things that we do is we do breeding bird surveys throughout a 2-month period. So we start in mid-May and go to mid-July, and we go out on the field at least 4 times during those periods in 2-week increments. And so we're not meant to be in a single field all day observing. These are more snapshots in time. But what we're looking for is breeding behavior and activity. Does the field composition change throughout the season? And what we really want to see is, if we're in a late mow field, we want to see early breeding behavior in May. And by the end of June, early July, we want to see late breeding behavior. So that includes seeing fledglings in the field, or birds that are no longer exhibiting breeding behavior and are just sort of singing, meaning that they've completed their breeding cycle and they're ready to move on, because that tells us then that field is ready to be mowed. As I said, we've done MODIS tagging. So some of the things that we've seen are that birds will extend their habitat by using non-breeding fields. So in this picture, we have 3 fields together. 2 of the fields are breeding fields, but then there's another field that they're not breeding on, but they're foraging in there. They're having these forays where they're detected. So once again, that points to the importance of connectivity, and that we can't just look at these fields as if they're not breeding, then they're not important. They play a role. And one of the other really cool things is we've now been able to get migration data. So these are all the detections from birds over 3 years, and we can see the difference in migratory strategies. So some of the birds will fly to the Carolinas or Georgia and kind of jump off from there and go over the Caribbean. Others will hug the coast and go down through Florida, but they're all moving to South America. And then the other really important thing that we've found, not just for our birds in this area, but we were working with researchers in Vermont and Maine who tagged birds, is the Delmarva Peninsula is a really important stopover for these birds. Not the majority of our birds stopped, but theirs as well. So as we learn about these life cycle needs, it can inform management and making sure that habitat is available at the right time. Because especially with climate change, one of the issues is the things that were synchronized in terms of timing are now becoming asynchronous. So we have to be more aware of those opportunities to maintain synchrony, to support different aspects of life cycle needs. The other thing that we always do is we're in communication with our landowners and farmers. They want to know what's going on in the fields. And the more we can engage with them, the more they can really be a part of this. So these were 2 maps that I produced for one of our observational fields, actually. This landowner, in the first year when we were on the property, I was able to find grassland birds that were there in mid-May, but when the field was mowed, they weren't there then again. So when he was looking at these maps, he saw, oh, okay, so some changes in management might help. And so he actually became a full participant after this. But we also just communicate with our farmers and let them know what's happening. Sometimes we'll say, hey, the birds have moved off the field. It's okay to mow now, even if it's earlier than they anticipated. So building in that flexibility, I think, has been important. And so, really being in touch with what's happening consistently is important. We also engage with the larger community. We've had bird walks, we've had meetings, because the more that people encounter these birds, I think the more they become connected to them. There's sort of a sense of local pride, I think, that you get knowing that, oh, these are rare birds, and yet here they are. These birds are the greatest ambassadors too. So I don't have to sell them. When you're out in the field with like burbling bobolinks and meadowlarks singing plaintively from a fence rail, they're selling themselves, which is important because one of the other aspects of this is the landscape changes when you're haying later. And if you're used to sort of Monticello by the end of May, that's not what these properties will look like. And so I think, I think people are open to changing when they understand what's coming as a result of that change. And so if you can see, oh, well, there's life in there. That's why there's delayed mowing. It's helpful. And then we also, whoops. Oh, sorry. Oh, I think I deleted one of my slides. We also partner with other organizations. So we partner with Brandywine Conservancy and Natural Lands, and we're here with French and Pickering Creek tonight, and we have regional partners in Virginia and in Maine. So the idea is that many hands make light work. And so how do we all kind of, if we have sort of common goals, how do we work together to achieve them? Oh, I didn't skip it. Sorry. I forgot about this. One of the other things that we've done is when people come to our events, they'll say, well, what can I do? So we produce this field management guideline, and it's general guidelines. And one of the most important pieces there is sort of our timeline for what's happening in the field with the birds, and then how does that impact mowing. So it gives people a sense of what is necessary and when, but we're always happy to do field assessments to actually go into individual fields and see what's happening. And so here are our partners. But anyway, the partners are really important because I think, especially in conservation, it's always hard to kind of get your message out. And so when we have this cohesive message about something we're all working towards, it makes it easier. So as I think about this, there are sort of these certain elements, I think, that have made us, that have helped us to be successful in the time that we have, and hopefully as we move forward. One of the really big things that was important in the very beginning was we received the Cornell Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative grant 2 years in a row, so in 2023 and 2024. So it provided the seed money to launch the program, but also I think it gave us legitimacy in the area because everybody knows Cornell ornithology. And then on top of it, we've forged a relationship with Cornell, and they've been great in bringing us in and trying to help us integrate, as I said, with regional partners. And so the idea is that if we can kind of take our individual projects, but figure out where there's overlap, there's a possibility of kind of creating this, corridor of conservation throughout the Atlantic Flyway. The other really important thing is that we have engaged with the farmers and landowners from the beginning, and it truly is collaborative. It wouldn't work to come in and say, you must do this. This is the prescription. You must follow it. And I'm really glad that we didn't do it that way because I've learned so much from them and how what's happening with their cycles and the things that they do. So working together I think we've been able to grow this conservation working landscape much more quickly than we would have if we tried to enforce something. And as I've said, research is so important. People always want to know, well, what am I doing? Is it making a difference? What's happening across the landscape? So we really want to show the value of these private lands for this conservation effort. And so we'll have, maps that we can produce for the landscape, but also for individual properties and that sort of thing. But it helps us too to know, how are we tracking trends? Are things different Like, for instance, we have one field that's like this great field. Bobolinks have been there, but in the last 2 years, they haven't. It's only the meadowlark. So it's like, we want to know then what's happening in that field. Why have they not been there? And in talking to other researchers, they've, like in Maine, one of our partner up there, she said, yeah, we've had it. And then fortunately, sometimes they will come back. So crossing my fingers that they'll be back. We have worked in partnership with Brandywine and Natural Lands. In fact, when we submitted the grants to Cornell, the first year we partnered with Natural Lands, and the second year we partnered with Brandywine. And we all brought something a little bit different to the table. So Natural Lands has a lot of public-facing preserves that people can come and encounter these birds, and they can show these areas as sort of demonstration areas for this grassland bird conservation, showing beneficial management practices, and also test different treatments. So I know they've done some meadow installations in areas that had been hay previously. And so they're also tracking the breeding there as well. And then with Natural Lands, as I said, they've been doing this for 40 years. They have these long-standing relationships with these landowners. So they've been able to help us to meet landowners who we might not have encountered. And we're actually sort of in Brandywine territory with the work that we're doing. So a lot of our programs are, we'll do joint programs and that sort of thing. And this year, actually, Brandywine submitted the grant in their name instead of in the name of the Grassland Bird Collaboration. So the idea is we're looking for ways to build on each other's work that we do, and they're actually incorporating bird surveys now when they do their land easement. Every other year they have to go and do an easement assessment, and so they're incorporating grassland bird surveys in that. We're also, we're looking at different types of partnerships. So we've had some inroads into the mushroom industry with mushroom farmers and composting facilities, and we're looking to extend those relationships to see, knowing that they want this late season hay that's dried out in the fields. They're looking for quantity when they're procuring hay. So is there a way to sort of formalize those procurement relationships to ensure that they're coming from hay that's mowed after July 1st? And then also, is there a way to kind of get them credit, to do sort of value-added branding? If you do meadowlark mushrooms, maybe it's a little more expensive, but if you know that the mushroom that you're eating made sure that those birds had a chance to breed, then you might be willing to pay a little extra for it. And the last thing is outreach is so important. So we have, we're always trying to reach a wider audience. So we've had the opportunity to have some media placement. WHYY did a really nice story in 2024, and I was actually just on Point, which is out of Boston, and they were doing a story about the negative impacts of agriculture on birds, and I got to be but is there hope? And I got to be part of the story of a hopeful story of agriculture being part of the solution. Speaking engagements like this one tonight is always a great opportunity to get out. So we're always, looking for ways to get this story in front of new people. Because I think a lot of people, when they know about things, they care and they want to figure out how to be part of it. So those are all the things that I think we've focused on doing in the last few years. And as we look on the horizon at what's ahead, one of the things we're really excited about is there's an interest in incorporating more regenerative practices. So in December, we had a guest speaker come from Illinois who has been he does, I think, about 12,000 acres, and he's been instituting, I think he's fully regenerative, but he's a conventional farmer. So he brought his story in December. We had many multi-generational farming families there, and there was a lot of excitement around the possibilities. And we're actually working with a farmer this summer who is going to be doing some test plots of conventional fungicide and natural fungicide. So the thing that he focuses on is he thinks he talks about the soil all the time. He says if you have balance between the chemical and the physical and the biological properties, you feed the plants from the bottom up, and you don't need to put inputs to add to that. So we really do see this as a working conservation landscape, and anywhere we can insert that conservation, we're happy to support the farmers to do it, and to improve sustainability, and to hopefully improve the bottom line for them, because chemicals are expensive. So if there are other ways to do things, we'd love to be part of helping them do that. We're always looking to expand the area that we're surveying, the area that has been set aside for grassland bird habitat, the area that we're engaging with farmers around. So we have our priority fields here in red. And so we're working to see which ones we can sort of incorporate this year. And we're also, we're not tied to our focal conservation area. Our focal conservation area is that area in blue there, sort of in the center. But you can see with all those little green dots, those are hay fields in Chester County that are greater than 25 acres. So there's a lot of opportunity outside of that. And so, the more we can start we survey down in Big Elk Creek State Park, which is on the Maryland border. And so if there's opportunities to start to bring in farms around there, it's just, the more you add habitat, the more possibility you have for increased breeding success. So here in the northern part of the county, we're in French and Pickering Creek territory, and you can see all of the 12,000 acres that have been preserved in orange, and interspersed in there, we have a lot of those green hay fields. So if there are opportunities here, we're certainly open to expanding in this area. And one of the little bright spots is right there in that little blue box. That is Brightside Farm, and it is a bright spot for grassland birds, actually. So it's preserved by French and Pickering Creek, and it's in Charlestown Township. And what they have been doing is they've undertaken a multi-year restoration project to improve the quality of the grassland vegetation, and also to remove invasive hedgerows to increase the open area. So you can kind of see it here. This is an older map. Underneath of the green, the shaded green, you can see the hedgerows that are part of that that are part of that park. But you'll notice this is a newer picture from Google Maps, and those hedgerows have been removed. So they've as I mentioned before, habitat fragmentation is a problem. These birds want these wide open areas. So they've improved this grassland area for the birds by opening up the grassland. And the hedgerows were actually a lot of invasive species. But I think a lot of times it's a hard sell to tell people, oh, you have to remove trees, because we always think of trees are good. So in addition to them improving the grassland habitat, they also planted trees in a riparian area. And so with that restoration area, they've also been able to increase the biodiversity along the creek. And eventually the trees will shade the creek and improve the aquatic habitat as well. And so this is just a little eye candy from Brightside Park. So they have grassland obligates, they have meadowlarks and bobolinks. I'm not sure if they're breeding there yet, but they're certainly there. But in addition to that, they have grassland associated species. So you have the little field sparrow, which I just love, with their little pink bills. They're just so delicate and sweet, and they have this little ping pong song that you can hear in the fields. They have eastern kingbirds, eastern bluebirds, and they have bluebird boxes there to support their breeding efforts, and then red-winged blackbirds, which are wetland grassland species. So the the good news is that, even though we're kind of far from the area where we consider our focal area, these grassland birds are here, and there's a lot of opportunity in this area to start to observe and provide habitat for these birds. And, Pennsylvania is a big state with a lot of grasslands and pasture and hay. So, this model is one that we've been developing for this area, but our hope is that it can expand further into the state. And we're actually working with the Pennsylvania Game Commission to start to do some surveys across the state and to understand how the timing of breeding might change throughout the state, and do we need the same standard for Pennsylvania, or do we need regional standards, that sort of thing. So when I talk about this, I talk about the positives for sure, because I think there are many positives, but I don't like to present this as like, oh, it's just a peachy story, and oh, it's so easy. And I think it requires a lot. It requires a lot from our farmers and our landowners. It requires an appreciation for how things can change. But as we do that, we have the opportunity to do something special in this area. And this is a really special area in Chester County. We've been able to preserve so much of the land. And so it's kind of a window into the enduring cycle of life. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on, but I wrote this part on, so I got to get them on. So it's we can see the evidence of this cycle throughout the season that supports throughout the seasons, throughout the summer season, and throughout the landscape that supports these grassland birds. So we see it walking in the stubby green grasses in April, setting up nets to tag meadowlarks as they awaken the field from the winter sleep, or starting the first day of the field season with the welcoming song of the newly arrived bobolinks. We see it when we admire the wildflowers peeping through the grasses in mid-May, or when kneeling in the wet morning grass, ready to release a restless bobolink back to its mate, or watching a colleague disappear in the waist-high grasses as she tracks the birds through the fields. Or we see it watching a flock of bobolinks form a fluttering cloud above a field of grass that seems to have all of the colors of the rainbow in it. Or later that same day, seeing a bobolink perch and practically disappear into a wheat-colored sea. And finally, we see it walking through the field on a few days before it's about to be mowed, seeing young birds exhibit strong and steady flights, knowing the nesting cycle is complete. Each of these moments in time is like a puzzle piece, filling in the holes to complete the cycle. They're all linked and they're all necessary. And so when we see our landscape changing, we can see the life that's coming from it. And so I think that's the thing that endures. And so for me, it really comes down to these two pictures. On the left, we have the agricultural value of the land. It's the reason, in a lot of ways, why we've been able to have the preservation that we do in Chester County. But the agriculture doesn't have to exist on its own. There's this possibility for coexistence between the people and the land use and the birds. And here on the right, we have one of the bobolinks that is using these lands and is so dependent on the people who provide this land. And so the Grassland Bird Collaboration wants to be the bridge between these two worlds. And as we develop a land conservation ethic that benefits all those who love and use the land. So this work is only possible through cooperation with a diverse network of people, farmers, landowners, our regional partners, supporters, scientists, where we can all come together to make a difference and hopefully reverse that steep decline for the grassland birds. So, thank you. So are there any questions? And I know there might be some online too, there's one here if there's not one in the audience. One is, she asks, from 1 year to the next, is there much variation in the breeding timing? No, not much. Sometimes it seems like the birds might be arriving a little earlier. Sometimes it's affected somewhat by what's the conditions are. Like if it's, if it's very dry or if it's very cold, they might get started a little later. But generally, we're seeing pretty much the same type of activity throughout this time. Although, as I said, there are some, within that window, you're going to have earlier nesters and later nesters. And so the hope is that we're capturing sort of the majority of the early and mid nesters, and though there might be some late nesters that won't make it through the mowing period. Yes.
Yeah, to that point, where given all the other grants, with that 90% off, to what extent are you selecting breeders over
By mowing July 1st.
Continually losing that?
Yeah. That's interesting. I never thought of it that way. It's possible then that we could be doing that. I mean, these birds exhibit field site fidelity, so they will come back year after year to the same field. So I guess it's possible that they could change their behavior. And we've actually recaptured birds. One bird we recaptured we captured him in 2021, skipped 22, recaptured him in 23, and he was on that same field in 23. So there is that connection to a single field. So if the mowing is occurring around the same time, the other thing would be it would have to be around the same time to do that. But yeah, I guess it's possible. Yes.
Can you summarize again what you can do for farmers? Like you survey their land for them and what other things? And then I have another question. Are you doing anything to support bobwhites?
We're not doing anything to support bobwhites. I don't even know if they're really that abundant around here.
No.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's so sort of random that it would be difficult to manage, but it's possible that the way we're managing could end up benefiting them. I mean, that's what happens we're not particularly managing for red-winged blackbirds, but because they occur in the same fields, they get the benefit of that later mow. But you had asked what we're doing for the farmers. So, well, first of all, we're making sure that whatever field we want to be in, that they want us to be there. So, because sometimes there's certain fields, like there's one farmer I work with and he says, no, I have to do the hay there. I can't make any changes there, but we'll do this field instead. So having that flexibility is one of the things, but then we'll go in and survey and be able to kind of track the development. So we have one farmer that we work with who said, it was 2 years ago and the drought was really bad. The hay was drying up. And I think he had intended, it was after July 1st, but I think he had intended to wait longer. But he said, yeah, I'm just losing tonnage at this point. What could you tell me if it's ready? Because I'd like to get in. And so we were able to go in, do the survey and sort of give him the okay to come in and mow. So that's the kind of thing that, by having it in a sort of a smaller operation, we're not spread out all over the state, we can be responsive to what the farmers are requesting. Yes.
So, do you have a challenge of meeting or getting in touch with all the farmers that you'd like to speak with? And if so, what do you ever ask the farmers that are participating to tell their neighbors or to say, look, if you know somebody else who's farming, would you mind making an introduction?
We are sort of running up against that this year. So we have a great group of farmers that we've been working with the last few years. But what I've been feeling is that, for us to be able to grow, we need to expand the number of farmers we're working with, because we can't ask them to shoulder all of the burden. And the more farmers we can work with, the more opportunity there is for, say, if a farmer is haying, maybe 5,000 acres or something, they can drop out one or two of those fields and it won't impact them. But if we're taking up more and more of a percentage of their fields, then there are fields they're going to need to get into before July 1st. So we have had the benefit of having farmers make introductions for us. I actually met with a landowner the other day who offered to introduce me to her farmer. So word of mouth is really important because I think the more that your neighbor is doing something, the more you're open to also at least exploring it. And farmers have actually brought us fields. So they'll say, well, I don't need to get into that field. I'm going to sell it for mulch hay anyway. So I'll give you that field. Last year we had a field, I guess the landowner decided they didn't want to participate. So he said, I'm going to have to drop that one out, but I'll give you this one instead. So, we've been really fortunate to have farmers that have really bought into this. And that's the thing that kills me when people, shake their fingers at farmers. These farmers care as much or more than anybody else about what's happening on the land. Let me see, there's some other ones here. Where is the best place the public can observe bobolinks? Stroud Preserve, right at the edge of Westchester, is a great place to observe bobolinks. It's a natural lands preserve, and actually it's really funny because natural lands, preserved of the land, and then it abuts a private property that's eased. And of course, the bobolinks are on the private property. But you can see them from natural lands. And fortunately, because of the work that we've been doing with natural lands, that landowner is now fully participatory in the program and in the delayed mowing. So in years past, I think he was mowing earlier, but now that he understands the importance of his field, he's mowing later. So that's all come about because of this, this information that we're providing and the work that we're doing. And really, I think just kind of that groundswell that has grown and people, want to participate. Yes.
We have extensive photographs of the meadowlinks and bobolinks that were mowed up in that private field in 2010 and 2011.
Oh.
And I'm still recovering.
Yeah, I can imagine it was a horrible sight.
On the meadow at Tri-State for Rescue next year on Bob. We released.
Oh.
So, I knew where the nest was and recovered the nest. Someone wanted to force the rock.
Okay. Yeah, I think it probably can be pretty devastating if you're in the field when it happens.
I contacted Dick Springhill, I think his name is, when I was a park ranger at Chester County Parks, and he called someone in a high place at Natural Lands to say, did you know this is happening? And from there, that was in like 2013 or 14, things started to change. And I greatly appreciate Natural Lands getting on the case there.
Yeah.
I haven't even been able to go back and see that.
That must have been, guys started going out in 2014. So I think it was right around there. And I remember at the time talking to the land manager and he said, yeah, we don't really have any control. So it took a few years to make that change. But now I think it's, it's sort of, he's fully on board and from what I understand, really pleased about it. So
that brings me, actually, I do have a question. When you first approach farmers, do you like make a case for these species? Or is there like the recognized intrinsic value? Like you don't have to say, oh, they're great, all the ways that they benefit humans because they eat insects or whatever it may be, but just on their own intrinsic value. Or as I think it was Scott Weidensaw who said, birds matter because they do. Like he got sick and tired of saying, oh, it's because, they pick up our spirits and they eat insects and, clean up the dead things if you're able to. Why do we have to justify them? So can you just say these species need our help and that based on their intrinsic value, the farmers are on board? Money at stake too. It's just such a hard proposition.
Yeah. So online. The question is, do we have to make the case to farmers for them to do to delayed mow? I would say that right now, the farmers that we have been working with, we really haven't had to do that. And we've been really fortunate that way. But I'm sure that there will come a time when the case has to be made. But I know, like, we have one field where he wants to change the management, but he consulted with me and said, well, what if I do it really early? Could we still, could it be beneficial? And I said, let's take a look, because if you're going to get it off by May 15th, it's really possible then. Because I said, when are you coming back in? He said, probably not till the end of July. So these, we have, by having conversations with farmers, we also have opportunities to understand how cycles might be able to fit into different patterns. So, I think, Chester County is a little bit unique in terms of its farming. We have farmers who aren't doing monocultures in these huge, like thousands of acres. So they're really connected to the differences in the land. They see the individual fields that they have and how they're part of this bigger cycle. So, I think we're fortunate that we haven't really had to make the case yet, but I also think that probably most farmers do understand the need for stewardship. They see it when they're making their decisions about soil health and that sort of thing. That's also part of the stewardship. So, I think when people can do what they can do, they will. And sometimes it's just not possible, and that's also a reality. So,
I know that, Vermont Center and the Baldwin Project and this one, and then a couple others that I know of conservation efforts. I just think it's amazing, because it's taking two like polar opposite needs and finding a way. And I really want to do.
oh, well, thank you. Yeah. And I think it's pretty cool when you can see, these sort of parallel paths, which seems like they would be parallel, and yet we can find this convergence too. Jim.
Where has ever been determined how far from wooded edges that these species will nest, and if, as a practice, have, say, an interior of the field been left and the perimeter been paid at an earlier date?
Been studies where they have done partial mows, and there are also suggestions when you're mowing to do kind of mow from the I think it's from the inside out, actually. Oh, that doesn't make sense. Maybe it's the outside in. When I was doing my modeling, I'm looking at the literature and making decisions about what is considered interior area. I usually left like a 50-meter buffer. And so within that buffer, then I wanted to know what the area was, not the area of the entire field. But when I'm out in the fields, you can see those fields that are far from edges. They're much more, there's a higher density of the birds. So you could probably, if you have less distance from an edge, you probably could have the birds, but you'll have higher densities the more distance you have from the edge, is what we've kind of observed. Let's see. You've talked about how adaptive grassland birds can be in making use of their field environments. Are they also very adaptive to higher proportions of invasive vegetation in a grassland habitat? Well, I would say the answer to that is yes, because the funny thing about bobolinks is they love these cool season hayfields, So there's been this effort to convert meadows to warm season grasses. And I think, there are other species that definitely benefit from that. But the bobolinks actually they just want to be on that ranch land, that cool season grass. So I say that to say that there's room for all of these different things. And, that's what's being hayed too. So if that hay can be delayed, it's providing good habitat for the bobolinks, and the meadowlarks are also on those cool season fields as well. Have you worked with Lancaster Conservancy, or do you have plans to work with them? I haven't, but I would love to. It would be interesting to see. I don't know how much grassland there is. I know there's probably more row crop in Lancaster than we have here. But as I said, we're looking to work with the Game Commission. And our ultimate goal is actually to inform the Conservation Stewardship Program, which is part of the Farm Bill. Right now, they have an August 1st mow date, which is prohibitively late. And you have to enroll for, I think it's 5 years. So what we'd love to see is for them to move that date up more in line with what we're seeing, which would be July 1st. Because we think it could increase enrollment and still enable farmers to get the economic value out of their land. The Virginia Working Lands was successful at doing it in Virginia, and they've been helping us to work with NRCS. We've met with them, and that's sort of the reason why we're doing this Game Commission study, is to see, are breeding dates different across the state, or could we have a blanket July 1st date that would satisfy the needs of these birds and still enable the farmers to farm that land. So, I mean, it's pretty cool to think about all these different ways that things are converging, because, you know, agriculture is really important, and we need farmers and we need people to be on the land. And then we also need these lands for these birds. So we got to find ways to layer all this in here. So anything, other questions? No, there's no more online, so. Oh, yeah.
We're in Virginia.
They're actually I think it's like across 14 counties in Northern Virginia. So it's a much more spread out area. They do a lot of cattle production down there, so their model is a little bit different, but I think it's like, I know Fauquier County is one and Loudoun County, but I don't know all the counties. It's a huge conglomeration down there, which is, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Let's stick around. Folks have more questions.
Sure.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you.
Yeah, well, she'll stick around if you have questions, and thanks for coming out tonight. Really appreciate it.